unleashing fear, one slice at a time, tracing the blood-curdling evolution of slasher films. This terrifying genre, born from the twisted minds of cinematic storytellers, challenges our deepest fears and confronts our darkest nightmares. Are you ready to embark on this journey, to venture into the chilling depths of the human psyche and the macabre world of slasher films? The emergence of slasher films in cinematic history was a game-changer. It was a genre that dared to tread where others feared to go. It took the concept of horror and elevated it to a whole new level. The pioneers of this genre were audacious, pushing the boundaries of what was deemed acceptable in film. They crafted narratives that were as gruesome as they were captivating, and the world of cinema was forever changed. These films were not just about gore and violence. They were about exploring the darkest corners of the human mind. Each scene, each cut, each drop of blood was a testament to the unfathomable depths of our fears. The villains in these films were not supernatural beings from another dimension, but humans, just like us, capable of committing unspeakable atrocities. The slasher of our society's fascination with the macabre? We are drawn to these films because they allow us to confront our fears in a controlled environment. They serve as a reminder of our mortality, of the fragility of life, and the potential for evil that resides within us all. It is a genre that continues to evolve, pushing the boundaries of horror and suspense. This journey will take us through the blood-soaked corridors of classic slasher films like Psycho, Halloween, and Friday the 13th. It will delve into their origins, their influence on pop culture, and their enduring legacy. It will explore the evolution of the slasher genre, tracing its path from the gritty realism of the 1970s to the meta-commentary of the 1990s and the reboot craze of the 2000s. We will meet the iconic villains that continue to haunt our nightmares, from the masked Michael Myers to the disfigured Freddy Krueger. Each one embodies a different aspect of our fears, from the fear of the unknown to the fear of our own inner demons. So, are you ready to take this journey? To uncover the secrets behind the creation of these films that continue to haunt our collective consciousness? To understand why we are drawn to this genre that is as horrifying as it is captivating? Then brace yourself as we delve deeper into the blood-curdling evolution of slasher films, because this is not just a trip down memory lane, but a chilling exploration of fear. Slasher films have taught us that fear is not just an emotion, but a primal instinct, a survival mechanism. They have shown us that fear can be unleashed, one slice at a time, turning the mundane into the terrifying. These films have left an indelible mark on our collective psyche, shaping our perception of horror and suspense. The evolution of slasher films is a journey that continues to unfold, and as we look forward to what the future holds, we can be certain of one thing. The genre that has enthralled us, terrified us, and made us question the depths of our own fears will continue to evolve, continuing to shock and awe us. Stay tuned. Scene 2. The Birth of Horror, a prelude to slasher cinema. Before we delve deeper into the world of slasher films, it's essential to understand their roots. The origins of horror cinema trace back to the early 20th century. These films aimed to evoke fear and horror in the audience, often featuring supernatural elements. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, an influential German silent horror film, is widely considered the first true horror movie. The horror genre evolved over the decades, taking on new forms and exploring different themes. The 1930s and 40s saw the rise of universal monsters, film's first real monsters. This era gave us iconic characters like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Mummy. Then came the 1950s and 60s, filled with psychological horror and suspense, with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho leaving an indelible mark on the genre. It was this film that introduced audiences to the concept of a human monster, a departure from the supernatural creatures that dominated earlier horror cinema. The 1970s, however, marked a significant turning point. This was the era that gave birth to the slasher film. Influenced by Psycho and the escalating real-life violence of the time, filmmakers began to explore the darker side of human nature. Movies like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween exemplified this new breed of horror film, focusing on brutal violence and the sadistic pleasure of the killer. These films paved the way for the golden age of slasher films in the 1980s, which we'll be diving into next. Stay tuned. As we venture into the 1970s, we witness the birth of a new subgenre in horror, the slasher film. Unlike their predecessors, these films focused less on supernatural horror and more on the monstrous capabilities of human beings. Early examples of slasher films, such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, introduced audiences to a new kind of terror. The killers in these films were not supernatural creatures, but ordinary people with a penchant for brutality. These films often featured a lone, typically masked killer who targets a group of unsuspecting victims, usually teenagers. The victims are picked off one by one, leading to a final confrontation with the final girl, a trope that has become a staple of the genre. The killers in slasher films are relentless and seemingly unstoppable, adding to the sense of dread and suspense. These films also introduced graphic depictions of violence, with each kill often more gruesome than the last. The influence of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is evident in these early slasher films, particularly in their focus on the psychological aspects of the killer's motivations. However, these films added a new layer of visceral horror, with the violence being shown in explicit detail. This shift towards more graphic content was a reflection of the changing societal attitudes of the time. The 1970s was a turbulent period, marked by political unrest and escalating real-world violence, and slasher films tapped into these fears. As we move into the 1980s, we'll see how the genre continued to evolve, giving us some of the most iconic horror characters of all time. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the golden age of slasher films. Scene 4. The Golden Age. Slashers in the 80s. Stepping into the 1980s, the slasher film genre was in full swing. This era is often referred to as the Golden Age of slasher films. Directors like John Carpenter, Wes Craven, and Sean S. Cunningham took the genre to new heights. This period saw the release of some of the most iconic slasher films, including Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Child's Play. These films introduced the world to iconic characters like Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, and Chucky. In the 80s, slasher films became more formulaic, often following a group of teenagers who are stalked and killed by a masked or disfigured killer. However, the genre was not without its innovations. Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street introduced a supernatural element to the genre, with Freddy Krueger being able to kill his victims in their dreams. This added a new layer of fear and unpredictability to the genre. The rise of home video during this era also played a significant role in the popularity of slasher films. These films were often low budget, making them ideal for the direct-to-video market. This allowed for a wider distribution of these films and helped to solidify their cult status. The 1980s was also a time of significant societal change. The conservative political climate of the era, coupled with the ongoing war on drugs and the AIDS epidemic, created a sense of fear and paranoia. Slasher films tapped into this fear, often portraying the killer as a manifestation of societal anxieties. As we move into the 90s, we'll see how the genre began to reflect on itself, with films like Scream offering a meta-commentary on the conventions of slasher films. So stay tuned as we continue our bloody journey through the evolution of slasher films. Scene 5. The Psychology of Fear. Slasher films' impact. Peering into the psychology behind the appeal of slasher films, we start to uncover some unsettling truths. The visceral thrills and chills these films provide tap into our primal fears and morbid curiosity. Slasher films allow us to confront our fears in a safe environment, offering a cathartic release. The archetype of the final girl, the last woman standing who often defeats the killer, resonates with audiences as a symbol of resilience and survival. Meanwhile, the omnipresent, seemingly unstoppable killers like Jason and Freddy embody our deepest fears of death and the unknown. They are the embodiment of the boogeyman concept, a universal symbol of terror. The randomness of their victims and the senseless nature of their killings reflect real-world anxieties about senseless violence and mortality. The impact of slasher films also extends to the filmmakers. The genre's low-budget nature and potential for high returns have made it appealing for new directors trying to make their mark. It has become a proving ground for many directors who have gone on to have successful careers in other genres. Moreover, slasher films have pushed the boundaries of horror, influencing and shaping the genre as a whole. They've challenged censorship norms and have led to discussions about the effects of violent media on society. As we move into the 90s, we'll see how filmmakers started to subvert and play with the established conventions of the genre, leading to a revival of slasher films. So, keep your popcorn close and your blanket closer as we delve into the Scream era in our next segment. Scene 6. Decoding the Slasher Code, Terminologies and Subgenres. Before we dive into the Scream era, let's take a moment to understand some key horror terminologies and the various subgenres within the slasher film category. First, the term slasher itself. Originating from the violent act of slashing or cutting, it refers to a subgenre of horror films where a violent psychopath stalks and murders a group of people, usually teenagers, in a graphically violent manner. Then, there's the final girl trope. This term, coined by film scholar Carol J. Clover, refers to the last woman standing who survives the killer's onslaught and often defeats him. She's often portrayed as intelligent, resourceful, and morally pure. Next, we have giallo, an Italian subgenre that combines horror and mystery elements. These films often feature complex narratives, stylish cinematography, and gruesome violence. They were a significant influence on the American slasher genre. Then there are splatter films, a subgenre that focuses on graphic depictions of gore and violence. These films aim to shock and disgust the audience with explicit, over-the-top violence. Finally, we have the meta-slasher. This subgenre emerged in the 90s with films like Scream that were self-aware, commenting on and subverting traditional slasher tropes. Understanding these terms and subgenres can enhance your appreciation of slasher films and help you see the nuances and innovations within the genre. Now, with this newfound knowledge, let's move on to the Scream era, where the genre got a fresh injection of creativity and self-awareness. Stay tuned! Welcome to the Scream era, a time when slasher films took a turn towards self-awareness and started to comment on the genre's own cliches. Clip: Scream movie scene where characters discuss the rules of slasher films. This was the birth of the meta-slasher subgenre, a fresh take on the traditional slasher narrative. Scream, directed by Wes Craven, was a game-changer. It was a slasher film that was aware it was a slasher film, and it used this self-awareness to subvert audience expectations. Clip: Interview with Wes Craven discussing the concept of Scream. But Scream was not alone. Films like Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and Cabin in the Woods also played with genre conventions, providing a fresh and often satirical perspective on the slasher film. Clip: Scenes from Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and Cabin in the Woods. Interview snippet: Horror film critic discussing the impact of meta-slasher films on the genre. These films did more than just entertain. They sparked conversations about the nature of horror, the rules of the genre, and the role of the audience. They showed that even within the confines of a well-established genre, there's always room for innovation and creativity. Clip: Montage of memorable scenes from various meta-slasher films. So, next time you watch a slasher film, keep an eye out for these meta elements. They might just change the way you view the genre, but for now, let's move on to the final segment of our bloody journey. Stay tuned. Scene 8: Slasher films today and beyond. And now we've arrived at the present day. Slasher films have come a long way, haven't they? From their bloody beginnings in the early days of cinema, through the iconic characters and narratives of the 80s, the meta-slasher revolution of the 90s and 2000s, and now to today. Clip: Montage of recent slasher films like Halloween Kills, Fear Street, and The Babysitter. In the current era, slasher films are experiencing a resurgence of popularity. They've evolved beyond the simple killer-on-the-loose narrative, incorporating elements of other genres and exploring deeper themes. Clip: Scene from A Quiet Place, showcasing the blending of horror with suspense and drama. But what does the future hold for slasher films? Well, if history is any indication, the genre will continue to adapt and evolve. Clip: Interview with modern horror director discussing the future of slasher films. One thing's for sure, the appetite for these films isn't going away anytime soon. The thrill of the chase, the mystery of the killer's identity, the exploration of our deepest fears. These are universal themes that resonate with audiences. And as long as there are creative minds willing to push the boundaries and reinvent the genre, slasher films will continue to slash their way into our hearts and nightmares. Clip: montage of iconic slasher film moments. So whether you're a fan of the classics or eager to see where the genre goes next, there's always something to look forward to in the world of slasher films. But for now, we've reached the end of our bloody journey. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the world of cinema. Until then, keep those lights on and maybe, just maybe, check behind the shower curtain before you go to bed tonight. Clip: iconic psycho shower scene. Fade out.